To Dylan Sicoscio de Cesare. There's a mouthful. I'm guessing by that you're Italian.
Yeah, I talk with my hands a lot. So,
Yeah. Well,
bippity
actually,
bob
funnily
bitty
enough,
boobity.
yeah. Well, I was in Italy a couple of weeks ago because you can practically see it from where I am right now. The border into the Aosta Valley it's only a 45-minute drive. So we drove down
Wow.
to Florence, Firenze for a weekend. One of my favorite places in the old country, I suppose you'd call it. One of my favorite places, fantastic place. Just walking around all over the place. The architecture, just the ambiance, everything about it is lovely. The light is good. It's such a nice place. It's one of my favorite places to go. Firenze. Anyway,
Well, just I actually researched. I've never been back. People in my family kind of had to commit treason basically to come here and leave everything behind. So I don't. Nobody wanted to go back and get the land or anything. But Florence is It's so rich in the universal system of priestcraft and ancient symbology that you could just, if you know what you're looking for, you'll never get bored seeing all the symbols and stuff there that are used all over the world. It's an amazing
I
place
wish I
from what I see.
I wish I'd spoken to you before I went because I love that now. Now that I have a tiny bit of knowledge, I love the fact that I can walk around these places and I see a symbol somewhere and go, I know it. I have an inkling of what that is. I wouldn't say I know what it is, but at least my eyes are open to what's going on, and it's that's it. This is why I'm so pleased I got you on because I've listened to quite a few times on podcasts, and what you talk about I find super interesting. Being a guy from Scotland who speaks only one language, and French is I'm conversationally good, but forget about it. That's about it. But I understand French pretty well, and I speak it pretty well. So it's not Italian. Forget it. So you are. How would you describe what you
Well,
do then,
let me
Dylan?
give you some hope though, because I don't
Oh,
speak languages either.
ah,
What I do is
okay.
I study the structure of them, the philology. And so what ends up happening, and I've developed this by researching scholars from Britain. And there's like this brief period from like the sixth, maybe I guess 17th to like 18th, 19th century, where the learned men who were publishing works in Britain is bar none the best. And they demonstrate how there is a universal system of letters and the way things are structured. And that is important because letters are invented by the priests. And this system is found all the way in like ancient Ireland from the Agam, or I know the modern people they say Oim now, but it used to be like pronounced Ogam, Agam. So I like to say Agam because the archetype is like that mercurial Heracles type of character, Agnius. And that's really interesting because Agnius effigies are, if you look at some of these old accounts, they were claimed to be found at places in Britain that were considered like Roman forts and stuff, whether it's in Northumbria or anything. And the Umbrians are what can't remember if it's Pliny. I think Pliny the Elder. It's one of those accounts talked about the Umbrian people being the oldest culture in Italy. I don't know that I agree with that, but if you look at the Umbrian alphabet, it's almost this one for one with the Etruscan. I say Etruscan, not Etruscan, because it's a Latin word, Etrushi, and the SC is pronounced like an SH in Latin. So you can even see that like in the old spelling of English, it terminates with SC rather than SH. So I say Etruscan, and you're also going to hear me say Etrusco-Phoenician, because when you look at the Etruscan alphabet, it's basically Pelagic, which is Phoenician, and they all come from this like same stock of systems or a system. And the reason I think the Phoenicians are ancient Italians rather than someone coming from the Orient is because Phoenician, the root of that comes from puni, which is an Etruscan word, and it means purple. And you see it still in Latin as Poeni, and poni is that OE ligature. That's how it looks. And when you look at their languages, that is what it's all coming from. And the ancient Italian, that Etrusco-Phoenician begets the Latin language. And if you study the ancient languages of Britain, whether it's the Cornish, Armoric, Welsh, the Irish and Scottish particularly, and I think the Manx is a little bit younger, but it's all still the same system. And northwestern France, which is Armorica, which I wouldn't be surprised if that's what America is really named after. Could be full of shit, but it's just something that's crossed my mind because a lot of people in New England are French, myself included. I'm part French. All of this is coming from the same system, and it's conceded that they were the thalassocrats, or the lords of the sea in the Mediterranean. The Greeks called them Tyrrhenians, and Pelagians, and they ruled the Mediterranean allegedly 232 years or so before the Phoenicians. So what I think the Phoenicians actually are the maritime navigators of the Etruscan Empire. And when you look at Rome, it's admittedly quasi-Etruscan all the way up to the 1st century BC. And my last name is Caesar, Cesare. That's what family I come from. I'm from various branches of the black nobility, although they would kill me if, like, back then, if I was doing the work that I do now, they'd probably put me to death because, in a way, I'm against the non-consensual, legalistic nature that the system that the Vatican employs and kind of controls us, but that's a different type of story. And it's not that they control us, it's just that they are entering us into contracts without our consent and full disclosure, which in the legal world, that's a null and void contract. But that's a different story. I don't want to go down that road. But basically...
I do.
Oh, yeah, we can if you want to.
But not now.
Yeah, we can if we want to, but I don't really want to... I guess what I'm trying to do with my work is yes, there's a lot of dark things in this world. There's a lot of quote unquote conspiracies, but I'm not trying to like push that. All I want to do is show people that if you look at language in our history, you can see there's an overarching connection between the ancient world that has been largely ignored. And most of the history we have that we consider like the Roman Empire is products of the Middle Ages. It's totally made up. It's bearing false witness. And that gets into a whole other thing, a whole other controversial subject when you start looking at, like, if you start reading the ancient languages of Italy, none of them are Indo-European, but they want us to believe that everybody's coming from the Orient, and the Vikingers and stuff, and all these like types of Scandinavian peoples are coming from the north of the Black Sea, and then maybe they're colonizing Britain, whatever else they're doing. But the thing is the Celts, the ancient Etruscan language is Celtic. That's where Roman comes from, and you can see that if you study all these languages, they all have affinity to Italian or Latin. And when you look at the earliest alphabets, they're just deformed Roman letters that they call Saxon in Britain. The most ancient architecture that they call Saxon, it's just Roman. So there is something that's being covered up, and I think part of it might be because people wanted to get out of having to pay tribute to Rome. So the best way to do that is to pretend they had nothing to do with it. And then after a generation or two, everybody's like, no, we're not you people. We have nothing to do with you, But where Britain gets its names, Bretanax, that's the Tin Islands. That's Phoenician. And so Britain was a hotbed. It was like a secret for the Phoenician Empire and the Italians and stuff. You'll still see like the same symbolism that Sicily uses on their flag. It's called the Triscale, means tri-leg. You'll see that on the Isle of Man. We were talking pre-show that the emblem of Ulster, you call it the red palm. You'll see that
red
on
hand.
stele. Yeah, red hand. Stelae of Tanit, T-N-I-T. If people want to look that up, you'll see that in Sicily. These predate that symbol. Now, I know that flag isn't developed to like the 1800s or whatever, but that symbolism is in your culture. And you see that it starts like that, and eventually they start putting an eyeball in it, in the palm. And then that,
I've seen
as
that
it
as well.
works its way eastward, it becomes the Hamsa symbol, but it's older in Sicily, in the Carthage. So it's fascinating. And I don't have my book on me, But the real universal empire is where I've laid this up in. And I basically wrote it for like 10-year-olds. You could give it to a child. It's not controversial. The goal was to just establish as many facts that I could get from the archaeological record, and then also from the linguistic record that we have from incredible scholars such as Edward Lloyd. His last name is spelled Llhuyd, and he wrote a lexicon that I'll send you when we're done. It's bar none one of the best preservations of your languages in Britain and northwestern France. And I highly recommend your audience and you start looking into this, because I think you guys are the key to figuring out what's going on in this world for our ancestors. And the reason I say that is because I can look at Etruscan artifacts in Italy and see words written on like artifacts, like a caduceus artifact, and it says Selvans. Now, Selvans is what archetypes like Sylvanus came from in Rome, and then that begat like Pan, that archetype. I don't know if you know Pan. It's kind of like the satyr with the goat horns and stuff. Yeah, and it's basically all the reckoning of the year archetypes, where the old year ends at the winter solstice and the new year begins, right? The Yule. And that word, you're not going to find what it means technically in Etruscan. But when I look at the Cornish language, the same word, Sylvans, means savior. So I'm almost 100% sure because of that. And when you understand the history and the early Irish alphabet is almost one for one the Phoenician, you can see that they come. And then when you look at their words in this book, The Real Universal Empire, let me see if I got a copy. Give me 1 second.
It's on your screen. Dylan's just popped to get the book. And I'm just going to do, you can still hear me. Can you still hear me? Yeah, good. Let me just do because this is going to be a bit of a mind blower for people who are listening. So I'll just do a little, because I know more about your work than I think most people who are listening would do. And so the Etruscan, I'm going to call it the Etruscan because that's what people will understand.
Yeah,
was an empire. I mean, they were the big dogs in town before the Romans came along. And you can still find, there are still Etruscan tombs still being raided to this day because I keep finding them all over the place. But they were an ancient culture pre-Roman. And I think the Romans, you'll obviously know a hell of a lot more about this than me, but they used a lot of took the best bits, I guess, of the culture. And when you talk about the Phoenicians, they were famous seafarers, we'll call it that. They were, what we're told,
kind of like the Venetians.
Like the
and
Venetians.
You see the interchange. There's a few of those names,
isn't there?
Those V's, those letters interchange. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a few places which you could, that tie into the Phoenicians. Venice,
in the Ireland, they call them the Feni. So there's like
Fenians.
So the whole body of Irish law is called Fenicus, and it's also called Chuncus.
Yeah. Well, they're called Fenians. They're known as, well, it's a bit of a slur nowadays.
And that's because those letters all interchange. And this is what I'm trying to tell you. Like when you start studying all these languages, you see who uses what letter for which. So we were talking about the Umbrians. They use the B for the V. So something like Minerva is spelled Minerva, but it's still Minerva. There's a lot of little subtleties, and this is why I would really love for people like you to really start looking at the British languages under this lens, because I think you guys have the key.
Well, it's like when you go to Valencia in Spain, it's Valencia. They don't pronounce the V; they pronounce it B. So going back to the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were an early. Well, they were. I don't really know too much about them, but there's a few things about them which I've discovered recently, which is.
By the way, don't feel like you got to walk on eggshells, because I don't know a whole lot about them either. Because when you look at the historical record, there's not a whole lot about them. People have just made stuff up where they're, instead of just leaving it blank and saying we don't know, they've made stuff up to make it seem like it's coming from the Orient. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so from what we know, from what I know, oh God, I hope I get this right, but from what you would call now, like kind of Syria, Israel, Gaza type of place, and a little bit, So that the Eastern Mediterranean seaboard, next to Cyprus, next to Turkey, between Turkey and Turkey and Egypt. So, and what was one of the funny things? And we're going to get to the Scottish aspect of it, but we're going to talk about how the Phoenicians, because you might say, well, you probably are shouting at your into the night, saying, "What the hell are they talking about? Phoenicians in Ireland and Scotland?" Excuse me. And then, so this is what I discovered relatively recently, probably certainly in the last year, is that there was, and I'm probably going to butcher this, and I'm sure you'll know more about it than me, but you mentioned Cornish tin. The tin mines in UK are in southern Wales and Cornwall. And that is basically the same place separated by a bit of sea. And if you're from Cornwall or Wales, then I didn't mean to offend you, but it's on that southwest aspect of the British Isles. During the Bronze Age is when the Phoenicians were at their alleged peak. And what is bronze made from? It's made from tin and copper. Am I right on that? Good. Okay.
And, I have to interrupt you.
Please do.
What wasn't there? Wasn't Scotland called the Kingdom of something? Begins with an A. Wasn't Britain called something with an
Alba.
A? Yeah, Albion.
Alba.
So that comes from Phoenician, means high or white. So it pertains to high rocks or white because that's what they saw from sea when they settled in southwest Britain, the high rocks, the white. And where are the Caesars from? Mount Alba. And the reason this is important is because I'm from the Caesar family. And that's the patriarch of my family. He had blonde hair and blue eyes, and they want people to believe that we're Turkish or some Asiatic race. We're not. We're Celtic. We're Celts. And for those who are incredulous, I just want to show you that I'm going to show you this page so you can just see. You can look all this up on your own, but you'll see. I can't see myself. Okay, you'll see that the Irish language has such great affinity to Punic, and these are words that were transliterated in the 1700s, what's left of the Punic in Malta. But if you look at the historical records, fantastic scholars like Thomas Assel, Punic was just Sicilian Phoenician. The Basque language is just Spanish Phoenician. If you look at the Basque language, they always pretend they have no idea where they're from and that they're this like race descended from Atlantis or whatever else. I'm going to give you this word. It is spelled A-I-T-A. It looks like this.
A-I-T-A.
Right? Aita. That means father in the Basque language. Now, you can look up this. Sorry, I really have to get better with it. Oh, there we go. That's how it's written in Etruscan tombs. So if you look up Aita in Etruscan tombs, centuries, like 400 years before the earliest Basque inscription, you'll see that that is an epithet of Shuri, which is the Etruscan Hades. So it's like Father Shuri, right? And we see this in that Aita, in Etruscan, it becomes Primus Aita, which is the first father. Then they would say you, God, you Primus Ater, God the first father, and that P Ater truncates into Pater, and that's where Pater, father, in Greek and Latin comes from, and that's where you Pater, Jupiter, comes from, God the first father. So you can see that in the Basque language. And in the early accounts, they say, well, the Basque letters are nearly Greek. What scholars like B.L. Ullmann had to concede is that all of the Greek abecedariums, which are like the alphabets that they had available, like all in one place, they all thought, all the stuff they thought was ancient Greek turned out to be Etruscan. And all this stuff about Latin descending from Greek turned out to be false. And in higher realms of education, like the archaeologists and stuff, they recognize that Latin is just a lingua franca that was developed by the ancient Italian peoples, like the Umbrians, the Samnites, the Etruscans, all of that. And when you look at the ancient Italian languages, they have no affinity to Indo-European languages, which is why they can't be translated. So if we were descending from Greek, there would be affinity. And because there's none, it's proving that ours is older, that the Celtic is older. And it's just different. It's not coming from the Orient. And that's all I'm saying. It's not to deprive anybody of their history, of their culture. But when you look at the language, there's some hurdles that you can't get around. And the way they've been doing this is there's a lot of forgery. There's a lot of forgery, and I think there's a lot of people who haven't really done the work, and they can't see this. But if you look at, going back to how I'm going to prove to you that we're Celtic, and that so Caesar is an Etruscan name. And back then, the C functioned like a G. So it was Gaisar. Now, Gaisar, that's where it takes the term in like German, where Kaiser becomes emperor or whatever, but that's long ago. But if you look at the word, I'm going to write it in two ways. And I'll give you two citations from the historic record. So you see Isar. If you look this up in O'Reilly's Ancient Dictionary from the 1800s, O'Reilly's Irish Dictionary, you'll see this word means God in Irish.
Aesar, Aesar.
It's what the Nordics call the gods. Yep, and that's what the Nordics call the gods. Aesir, you see? Aesar means sun. So this also means God in Etruscan. And how would I know that? Well, according to the copyists who copied Suetonius' work, so it could be forgery because the oldest copy is only from like the 9th century AD, but this is what we have to draw from. But in Suetonius' work, he wrote in Latin, Aesar ides reliquo parce Gaesaris nomine Etrusca lingua deus vocatur, meaning Aesar, which forms the remaining part of the name Caesar or Gaisar, is in the Etruscan language the denomination of God or the name of God. And then another one, Aesar,
Esar.
Yep, sol in Etrusium etiam lingua Aesar vocatus est, meaning sol, the sun, in the Etruscan language is called Aesar. So all the way back into this, our ancestors, the God and the sun are related to the same thing. And the reason, so you're Scottish, right? What's your word for sea? Do you know?
Sea.
So,
I don't know what it is in Gaelic.
Like the SEA. It's MOR, Maur.
That's right. Sorry, yes. That's in Gaelic, yeah.
So that means sea in your language. And that word in Latin means ocean, mare. Or sorry, sea, mare, maur. Mm-hmm. But in Phoenician, and this is why I really want you guys to look into this, because the Irish, for whatever reason, were able to either isolate themselves and not experience as much cultural diffusion so they could preserve our history, or something else is happening. But when you look at that word in Irish, it still retains the Phoenician meaning, which is great. So in Italian, we still have this word in in people's names. Like there's a name called Mauro, right? And so in Phoenician, it means great lord or prince. You'll see this in Mauritania in North Africa, where you'll see Phoenician cities like Lysus, which is basically, it was named after lions, Lys. That means because it had so many lions there, that's why they named it that. But in Irish, you know what the Aran Islands are? A-R-A-N? I don't know how to say it. Is it Aran? A-R-A-N? Aran.
Aran is so if you say...
No, that's the goddess, though. Aran means land. It's not Ireland, but there's a subset on like the north, is it the west coast of Ireland? There's a group of islands called the Aran Islands, A-R-A-N.
Okay.
And one of those islands is called Inishmar.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one.
So that just means great island. So that same word, that M-O-R, that is in Scotland means sea, or in your version, it still retains the Phoenician meaning of great island. Mm. And there's a really cool thing called the wormhole there, if you've ever seen that. And they say it's like a natural like rectangle cut out of the rock. I think it was probably a fishery or something, because you'll see this all in the islands in the Mediterranean. Carthage, Malta. You know, sometimes people call them ocean baths, but I think they were probably places for like storing their, like
Fish.
they'll put the seafood in the nets and keep them fresh or whatever, something like that. I don't know, but you see this footprint, and the reason why the Irish is so special, in my opinion, is because they've retained all the ancient stuff, and their letters, all are similar to the Phoenician system. The only challenge, though, is the oldest Irish manuscript that's written in Irish letters is the Psalter of Colmcille. And so that's St. Columba, for those who aren't listening or who aren't familiar. You might be familiar with St. Columba. But the language, even though it's written in Irish, the language is Latin.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to send you the photographs after. It's on my phone, and I won't do it now.
yeah, I'm excited.
My parents live in Cyprus. So for those who don't know, Cyprus is the Eastern Mediterranean, like I said, between Turkey and Egypt, Eastern Med, closer to Turkey, very close to Lebanon, Syria, Israel, etc. And that's one of those islands which has been, any civilization has owned Cyprus, you name it. And the Phoenicians were certainly there, because there's a harbor, it's called the Old Harbor. And you'd walk past it and you wouldn't, it just looks like it doesn't look like a harbor. It's like a small bay, an inlet almost. And, it's shallow. You can jump in, and there's these straight trenches cut out of the sandstone probably there. And I was looking at it, and I thought, what, this is weird. But it can't be that old. And then I found out when I was reading a book at my mum's house, which it's a 5,000-year-old Phoenician harbor. So, which brings me back a little bit to what I was going to say about before, for those listening, to get how I got interested in this subject and how I ended up speaking to you, is because, like I said, during the Bronze Age, bronze and tin are the main components. Sorry, copper and tin are the main components of bronze. And this, we know all the Bronze Age. The tin came from Cornwall and South Wales. And
I think a little bit in Spain too, because this is going to blow your mind too. It's going to blow your mind too. So in Spain, now it's like this. It's called the Port of Cadiz, right? But I think it looks like It's something weird like that, like QADZ, something like that.
It would be the Arabic spelling might be with a Q.
Yeah.
CADIZ is the.
But it was named that after friendship. And if you look at, again, I'll revert to O'Reilly's Irish Dictionary. Friendship is Kadas. So for everyone who's thinking this is crazy, I promise you, when you go look this up, you're going to start seeing that I'm not talking out of my ass, and the penny's going to drop. And what you see in our cultures, specifically the Irish and the Britons and the Italians, and this is kind of like Mediterranean, we're all good with the navigation. We have a secret system that we use to get from place to place to mine and all that stuff. And that's what made us, like the Italians, the reason they were superpowers, because at that time they had pretty much all the metals that they could want. And if you look at the accounts, they also were experts at draining swamps and like irrigating the land and turning those lands into pastures. So they also had the highest crop yields in the ancient world. You don't see this in other cultures. You see the Britons, they're expert navigators. Who's going to dispute that? And the reason they're one of the most learned cultures is because while the British Empire was thriving, the freedom of the press was also existing. So people were able to really start showcasing their findings, and everybody else wants to claim like we're like these colonizers that moved in on all the stuff that they'd set up. Yet we still do all of this stuff today, right? People still brought the best masons in the world, which are from Italy, to places like Westerly, Rhode Island, which has the best granite in America, to mine that and build the cathedrals and stuff. So like, and if you ever get a chance, if you look up Rhode Island, look up the Newport mansions, and you'll see the reason they imported all these Irish people to specifically build these amazing Gilded Age homes. So they're not being brought over as like these incompetent slaves. You know what I'm saying? But it feels like
Ah,
that's the narrative they're pushing.
well, you know, I will eventually get to my point, but this is just so interesting where you keep all this knowledge
I'm
bomb,
sorry, I
truth
had
bombs.
to. I can't help
No,
myself.
that's
We
okay.
get for the audience. I apologize. We get excited and we just go on tangents.
That's
It's just going to
okay.
happen that
I'm
way.
all in. I'm all in. You're asking, you're questioning why that it seems to be it's been very well preserved in the British Isles, especially Ireland, north of Scotland. It's that you've obviously never been to Ireland or the west of Scotland. You're better off sticking out in Italy because the weather is not great. I'm not. It's windy.
But
It's
Italy
wet.
kind of sounds like a layer of hell to me, just because. So in America, we're like very like punctual and stuff, and the way the time is like elastic to them, and you can't get anything done when you want. It just
I
seems
love
like
it.
I would have a difficult time there.
Yeah, you get used to it. Trust me. All right. So going back to the copper aspect of the whole thing, so this is what really blew my mind. And the first time I heard it, I thought, what a load of crap. But there are, and you can look this up. This is not me saying this, and it's not going to be you, Dylan, saying this. But there are ancient copper mines in Illinois. I think it is in Illinois, quite near Chicago, anyway, south of Chicago, and they are whoever's been mining them, and it goes back a lot, thousands upon thousands of years, and they have taken a lot of copper. You know, thousands of tons. They're very old. Just leave it at that. And so, and then an interesting story. There was a person I was listening to who's researching giants in North America, which is a subject I need to go on to as well because that was a good one. But the Native American tribe of that area, can't remember what the names of the tribes were. It's not important to the story, but their oral tradition, and we have established in the previous podcasts that oral tradition is usually very, very accurate and very correct. They didn't write anything down, but so they talk about this culture of fair-haired, white-skinned, blue-eyed people who lived there for thousands. They were there for thousands of years, and they lived with the Indians, whether they enslaved the Indians, and I'm using Indians in
I think they were actually more
Native
friendly with
Americans.
them. Like
Yeah,
I think that's why they trusted the Spanish, because they were waiting for like their friends to come back.
to come back. Yeah.
And those weren't their friends.
Well, it becomes really interesting when you say that because they had, and this is their own tradition. They had metal. They had metal arrowheads. They had knives, etc. They could use metal tools. And then one day, I don't know what happened. No one really knows what happened. But these fair-haired, they call them giants. They weren't that tall, but they were probably about 6 foot ish, what we'd call nowadays. They one day left after several thousand years being there, being part of the culture, living there, had a civilization. They're even finding roads like Roman roads, proper, you know, multi-layered, like you see nowadays when you put down your aggregates and you end up with paving stones on top once it's all flat. That's being found in America. Again, you can look this up. I am not making it up. I'm really not making this up. And so what other person was saying, oh yeah, and by the way, and one day they left. They left. So I guess something happened back at home base, back in the Mediterranean, and then the Native Americans, the Native American Indians there, they went back to stone tools. They went back to the Stone Age after these people left. So that's an interesting point. So what I'm trying to say in this long-winded way is that the Phoenicians had a trade that they went from the Mediterranean to southern Britain, picked up the tin, and the trade continued up, and they would go up into what I guess like Hudson, was it Hudson Bay? I'm not sure, but they'd go into the Great Lakes, get themselves down to Chicago, get the copper, go down the Mississippi or the Ohio River, whichever one it was, down into the Caribbean, stop in the Caribbean, in Florida, and I can't remember what they were doing there. It could be something to do with slavery. Not entirely sure, and don't quote me on that because I just don't know. But I think that could have been part of the trade, and then back. So there's like this triangle from the Med up through Britain to North America, down into the Caribbean, and then back to Europe. So if that's true, And there is a lot of evidence points to something like that going on, because that's when the Bronze Age exploded in the Mediterranean, well, across the world, actually, as it happened. So they had the skills of metallurgy. And so that's when we talk about the Phoenicians, you go, who the bloody hell are they? It gets to when you start to think about if this is possible and if it is true, and I really hope it is, because then it just blows everything out of the water in history, that there was a thriving trade between Europe, well, what we call Europe now, and North America, and probably elsewhere. So that's what I was trying to lay the foundation on. So when we give ourselves a bit more credibility when we talk about this.
Yes, and there's a couple things I want to talk. So when you do get a chance, I really dive into these subjects with book 5 and book 6 of Spirit World. The first one's called The Holy Sailors. The second one's called Terminalia. You don't need to read the rest of the series to access them. They're kind of like their own thing, but they do pertain to the overarching pattern that I'm trying to show people, which is this ancient universal system. Well, even if you look at, so you know how you have Tuscany or Etruscans, or whatever, how people want to say that. Well, you also have that same root that I would say Tushis or Tushi or Etrushi. You have that in the Tuscaloosa Indians, which I would say like Tuscaloosa, but that in itself is just coincidence and doesn't matter. But they have something called the rattlesnake disc. And so when you're re-listening to this, make sure you Google image search this, and you'll see that rattlesnake disc is holding, it's got the same palm that you'll see in Ulster, that you'll see in Sicily and Carthage, and it's got the eye in it. The thing is, the rattlesnake disc is only dated to the 1700s. Or no, excuse me. It's dated to I think the 1200s or 1300s. It's still, if it's real, it's weird because at the very least it shows people got over here before Columbus. But if it's fake, then I've just demonstrated that people are forging artifacts. Because you can't have that very specific Phoenician symbol if you didn't have interactions with them. And if it only dates to the 1400s, that's some 1,000 years prior to their dealings here. But something I also wanted to bring to your attention is, so what got me going on this is I came across an account from a gentleman named Lionel Wafer, who is an Irishman who grew up speaking the Highland language of the Irish and the Wild Scots. And there was an accident, a gunpowder accident, and his leg got burned to the bone. So they couldn't bring him back. So they left him with the Darien Indian tribe in the Isthmus of America, which is kind of like near modern-day Panama. And he was able to learn their language in less than a month and be fluent in it because it had such great affinity to the Highland language. And it's guttural and all that stuff. And then when he also noticed he says it in his accounts, there's Indians there that look like they might have had European fathers or something. And when he inquired about their skin and why they kind of look white, to the Indian chief, his name was Lacentia. The guy said their mothers contemplated the moon when they conceived. And when you look at, and everything you're talking about, when I came across this, I thought it was whitewashing of American history. And I was like, there's no way.
Sorry, that's racist what I just said.
Yeah,
right?
I was like, there's no way. That sounds crazy. Then I started looking into it myself, and I have very high standards. And what you will see, you can look this up on Google Images. You'll see Roman, Gallic, Celtic rings with tot on it, T-O-T.
Mm-hmm.
And the archetype is Tuisco, also known as Tutates. It's kind of like that Thoth, Tot, in Egypt.
Oh, God.
The Mercury character. And this is the Mexican word for God or divinity. And
T-E-O-T.
well, what they do is they terminate it with an L. So it looks like
Total, yeah.
But the L is silent. When you actually learn how the people pronounce it, it's tot or teot. And the thing that's bizarre is when you look at these early accounts from like the Franciscans and Dominican and the people that were trying to figure out what's going on, they have all these things in their language that they have no idea where they came from. Like they couldn't explain that TL or TLE determination on their words. They had no idea what it's come from. Furthermore, they didn't use beasts of burden. They didn't have pulley systems. They didn't have hard tools or weapons because despite having iron-rich mines, they didn't know how to mine or smelt iron. Yet they have all these incredible elaborate temples. Some of them are in the same fashion as temples like from Jupiter Belus in the ancient world, and they're trying to figure out like what's going on here. And then even the locals themselves said they didn't build the temples. And I think that's why they were so friendly originally with the Spaniards, because they were thinking that it was this ancient culture returning that they had been anticipating.
Yeah. So an interesting point is we should have set this. We should have started recording straight away because I knew we'd end up missing some good stuff off the start. But we talked about Atlantis, and I had a fella on not long ago, but he did a very good episode, and he's a scholar. He's a historian, professor, university professor, and he would talk about various different things. I'll send you the link to listen to that one because I think you'll enjoy it. And he was talking about the linguistic similarities between the Basque people in northwest Spain, so on the French border. Well, it's actually in France as well. What am I saying? The Basque region is in southwest France and northwest Spain, and there was this how the link between the languages are quite a unique language. There's not much in the way of connection between it. I know you're going to blow me out of the water here, but that's not my point. My point is that he was talking about how there are Indian tribes. Again, when I say the Indian, I mean that with all respect. I'm not being a racist.
It's weird because some people in America, they like being called American Indians.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's because they're from India. They're from Asia.
Oh, really?
Because on the further the East Coast you go, the more Caucasian features they have. They just have like a reddish hue to their skin. Yeah. So there is an an Indian race that isn't from America that has a hue. And I kind of have it because I'm part of that. The tribe would be Anyanwia. They call them Cherokee now. But like when I'm around I'm Italian. When I'm around other Italians and we tan, I look red and they look brown. Like it's a totally, even though they have blue eyes and shit, I still look red. And they're like, "Are you Indian?" I'm like, "Yeah, I am part Indian."
Could be.
So there is a red hue to the skin that until you see it in person, you can't appreciate it. And I've never seen anything like it from an Asiatic people. So I'm not saying that there aren't natives from here. But I think what happened is, I'm not saying it's an ice bridge or whatever, how they say the Bering Strait froze over or whatever, but I think maybe some Asiatic, maybe Japanese, or specifically the island of Java. When you have all these Polynesian people and stuff coming from South Thailand, there are nautical navigating people in Southeast Asia. And if you look at the temples in Java from like the 1400s, and then you compare them to some of the stuff you see in Mexico, I can show people temples in Java and say, "Hey, what part of Mexico is this?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I can't remember. I think I saw that when I was there." Like it'll be reminiscent. And then I'll say, "Nope, it's from Java."
Yeah.
And you can see all this. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Asians got there as well, because there's definitely an Asiatic phenotype in America to the natives, in my opinion. Well, there are that Caucasian features there where they look like they are related to Europeans. They just have that reddish hue to their skin.
Well, we could go into the controversial waters here, Dylan, but the point I was going to making was that he did a linguistic comparison between, and he found words in Native American tribes who were, the words were very similar.
Are you talking about the Mi'kmaq? Talking about the Mi'kmaq
Could be the
people?
Mi'kmaq. I can't remember. But when it comes down, so when I mentioned the fact that there was this civilization, lost civilization now, whatever it was, now being rediscovered, and again, I know very little about it. I'm just saying from what I was reading about.
You don't have to keep prefacing that. You can just say it. And
I'm just going to say it.
Because the way I work is, I'll look into whatever you say, but the thing that I struggle with is a lot of people make claims about the linguistics, but then when I'm like, "Where's your inscriptions?"
Yeah.
Nobody ever provides the inscription. So like the Basque people will say their ancient language, and then I'm like, "What's your oldest inscription?" And it's like first century BC. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you're using Etruscan words, and I can find these inscriptions from the fourth century BC and older. And I'm different because there's a lot of people that have noticed this before, and they'll say, well, it's because the Italians and all this stuff, they all came from Britain. And I'm open to that because, like I showed you, clearly Celtic, Germanic, blue eyes, blonde hair, not Eastern, Asiatic, or whatever. So I'm open to that. But then when I say, it's kind of like playing poker, where it's like, okay, you show your hand. We're betting on the pot, right? And it's time to show the cards. The Irish can't produce inscriptions older than the 5th century. The Scandinavians are even worse. They have all these things. They're like the oldest Finnish inscription, if you believe it, because a lot of people think the Phoenicians and Fenians are from Finland. And again, that's something that I would totally buy into because of the phenotype. But then when I say, where's your evidence in the language? All they can produce is like these artifacts from the 1200s. And it's like, scribble on wood. And I'm like, no. You expect me to believe that Scandinavians, the best they could do is some chicken scratch on an antler comb while the rest of the world's building lifelike marble statues? I'm not buying it. I'm just not buying it, because if you look at Germanic people, they're really good with engineering and stuff. There's just no way that there's just a lot of stuff in the historical record that I think is forgery. And I think it's people trying to like hype themselves up. Like you hear the Orlinda, you hear about the Vinci tablets in Serbia. And when you learn these ancient alphabets, and this is why I'm trying to get people to learn this system, you can see that the further back you go, the less letters they had. So the first Etruscan alphabet was only 12 letters. The first Phoenician alphabet was only 13 letters, which in my opinion indicates the Etruscan is older, despite them being the same system. And then when people say, well, these Vinci tablets are from 10,000 years BC or whatever crazy claim, 6,000, they're always making these crazy claims. But then it's like they're using alphabets with way more letters. So yeah, maybe that maybe that artifact isn't a forgery, but it's not dated to what you think it is because it's using more letters and letters that were modern additions. And that's where I have a problem with a lot of this America stuff, is because I live near in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a volcano called Mount St. Helens that erupted in like the 1970s or 80s. I can't remember. And they dated some of the rocks that came out of that as being millions of years old with their whole carbon dating or whatever their process is. And they were only 30 years old. So they've constantly shown time and time again that their dating process is worse than guesswork. It's not scientific, doesn't employ the scientific method. And that's what I mean by that. And then when you look at the DNA situation, DNA isn't as reliable as we think. It's reliable to what currently exists. But they found ancient cadavers in Carthage from like 1500 BC, and nothing in Lebanon matches it. Nothing in Europe even matches it. The closest thing that matches it is a rare type of DNA in Portugal, but even that's not a match. And obviously you can see the language. These people were all connected, and we're all descended from these ancient cultures. So why isn't there a DNA match? And it's not because they're different species. It's just our DNA changes over time. I think that's the only solution that I can come up with that makes sense to me. That it's not, our DNA is not set in stone. Like in 1,000, 2,000 years, your grandchildren's grandchildren are not going to have the same DNA as you. And that's what I think is going on. And that's why it's so hard to accurately, chronologically place this stuff.
Yeah. So the other night we were having a back and forth on email. I was talking about, you were asking me about DH, so the letter D, letter H, and whether it occurred where I live. And yes, it does, because there's a bunch of whiskeys.
Was it DH or was it BH? I can't even remember.
BH and DH.
What's the word for dove? Because it looks like doob. D-U-B-H?
Yeah, D-U-B-H is...
And that BH function. And that goes back to the B and V interchange that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. So
bishop,
it depends.
Bishop,
Yeah. So MV, sorry, MV, MH... I sent you that video, that YouTube video. That was the guy did a good job, because I didn't know, I had no idea. But there was a couple of girls called, it's M-H-A-I-R-I is the name. And you think it'd be Mari, but it's not, it's Vari. But it's with the MH because and if it's MH at the beginning for V, and if it's BH that's the V at the end. That's what it is. So it's MV for V at the start and VH for V at the end, or something like that. There was an American guy, the professor, who's lived in southwest Scotland, and he learned the Gaelic and he went deep into it. So that guy was good. I sent you that link. Have a look at him. He seemed to know what he was talking about. But it all gets a bit fascinating. So how does that tie in with the Phoenician, the Etruscan language?
So what you'll see is like they just take different symbols. So it's not like the V is a sound that's gotten rid of, right? It's just something that they use different letters. Like you'll see this in Cornwall. They're basically just changing up the letters and the symbols that belong to the letters. So like you'll see like the Cornish use like an upside down H, and it kind of looks like a U, and I think it's to function like the Greek upsilon, which when capitalized looks like a Y.
Yeah.
You'll see in Etruscan, you'll see like, so a lot of people aren't aware that even the runes that the Germans and Scandinavians use, they come from the alphabet at Clusium, which is Etruscan. So you'll see like in Greek, they have this thing called the he letter, and that it functions
Delta.
like CH. So that's what you see at the beginning of Christ.
Yeah,
X,
sorry, yeah.
like Christ.
Oh,
right?
it's an X. Sorry, I thought it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
the
yeah,
Delta
yeah.
symbol.
Sorry,
Or lambda even.
Yeah, my writing's not the best in the world. You have to forgive me. So in Etruscan, you'll see this written like that, and then at later times like that, and that's Lieben. Like they use that in that rune. So you'll see all of these things coming from Italy. And the reason I say they're coming from Italy is because that's where the earliest inscriptions in the historical archaeological record are being found. If somebody can produce this stuff coming from Britain, I would just, it wouldn't change anything. It would just be like, yeah, I'm on board with you guys. It's coming from there. Oh, I'm on board with you guys. It's coming from Finland, for sure. But they're not doing that. They're just getting emotional and whining and crying and lying. And it's like, what is going on? It's like, there's like this weird aversion. And I think it may be just because people don't want to be associated with the current state of Italians, but hey, if you're going to do something about the problem with the aging population in Italy, because a quarter of its people fled to Italy, fled to America, the best way to solve that problem, in my opinion, would be to invite the Irish and the Scottish and these people from Britain who are ancient to come back home
on holiday.
We'll give you a house and land that will be in your family for as long as you decide to have a business and you know what I mean? As long as you're not unproductive. That would be the solution, in my opinion.
Well, you mentioned before, and it's actually, I love going there. It's the area is called Alba, and it's just south of Turin, Torino. So
yeah.
Not far away. It's about 3-hour drive for us.
So if you get a chance to go back there, have you heard of the Tusculum portrait?
No.
So they say Tusculum portrait. It's being held in Turin. It's the only bust that was confirmed to be made of Julius Caesar while he was alive. So what I want to challenge people to do is you can go online and get a better picture because this is going to be grainy, right? But you type in the real Universal Empire, and the images you get, my nono, Domenico di Cesare, and you can use Canva or something to superimpose the face of Julius Caesar on him, and they have the same creases. They even have the same crease in their neck. Everything is the same. And you can see that phenotype is still in my family 2,000 years later.
Wow. I know.
So I challenge people to do that just because you brought up Turin.
Yeah, well, Alba, the reason I mentioned Alba, because Scotland was, during Roman times, it was called Caledonia, and England was Anglia. I think the ancient name is Albion for England and Alba for Scotland. Erin or Era for Ireland.
It's the same root that N is just a Greek termination, that O-N.
Right.
So it'd just be like Albi.
Yeah, and the Welsh are the Cymru, I think it is. So I don't know. I'm probably getting those really badly wrong, but it just seems so. And then you mentioned something before, Northumbria,
or
North
Cumberland.
Umbria, which is a region in Italy. Cumbria, the one next to it, Cumbria, we
They'll
say.
tell you it's named after a
Umbria.
river, and that's the end of it. I'm
Or
just
the
like, well, then
Umber.
why are all of your ancient languages Italian in structure? I'm just asking.
Excuse me. So that's, you get into that point when you start getting into that, the coincidences across the whole thing it's a bit.
And by the way, because I know there's going to be some Brits that are listening to this, this isn't coming from me. I'm not some American making up bullshit about your country. I got this from Godfrey Higgins, who's a lord over there. Right? He had his own estate. So I got this from actual Brit. The reason, in my opinion, my work is so good is because I learned from British scholars who I already said is, in my opinion, are the best in the world during those times. Cardinal Valency, Godfrey Higgins, I mean, you name it. Robert Taylor, all these guys. Some of them were imprisoned for exposing some of this stuff. And they said they were blasphemous.
Yeah, but it just sounds, it would be so fascinating, wouldn't it, if we knew what the situation is. I have my doubts about what we are presented in history. When somebody like Napoleon goes that history is a story agreed upon. I like to butcher. So I like to butcher quotes.
You know what? I don't even think it was Napoleon. I think that's been attributed to him, but there's a bunch of other people that said it. Like there's a bunch of variations of that. Like what is history but lies agreed upon and all that other stuff. Yeah,
exactly.
I've looked into that because I've quoted Napoleon, but then when I chased it down, I don't know if it was Napoleon who said it, but it's someone like that.
Yeah, a set of lies agreed upon. And when you like I do, I love to go into these things, and for me, the crazier the better. And I like you, I'm skeptical, but for me, it's fun, and I enjoy it. And if it resonates, I'll try and find someone like I did for you. I'll try and find somebody to come on and talk me through it. And I say, okay, yes, or nah, this person's, I'm not necessarily buying it. But when you do dig in and you do find things such as this copper situation going on, this civilization with the copper, and it could be controversial because we're whitewashing it. I think it actually makes it more interesting, if you ask me.
And real quick, just to support you, this is in the historical record. Like, so if you talked about Britain or tried to move there from Carthage, you were put to death. So this was a very rigid system. It's how they maintained a tactical advantage, and they didn't want people to know about Britain because they didn't want people fleeing. Just like how Italians are in a state of ruin right now because a lot of their youngest, strongest, brightest people said, fuck this, we don't want to be under the kingdom of Italy, and we're going to America. And that's what a lot of my family did. And the same thing would happen with Britain, and Carthage would fall anyways. But it was illegal to talk about this stuff. So when you're going to these places, you're usually going in the employment of some king, right? So there's even an account, if you look into Herodotus's work, he admits he doesn't believe the account, but he still gives it anyway from his informants. And is that this King Nikos, Necos is how he spells it, I think in Greek, something like that. He was an Egyptian king, and he hired Phoenicians to sail around Africa. And he said it took them like 2 or 3 years, and they would sail, then they would plant, harvest, sail again, and it took them 2 years, and they finally came back through the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Strait of Gibraltar, and then finally back to Egypt. And that's all the way, he said he wrote, I think, in the 5th or 6th century, something like that. Forgive me, it might be 8th. I always there's so many historians like that I mess up all the time. But something I want you and your audience to look into so you can see how I'm coming to these conclusions. If Herodotus is a legitimate historian, and then in the same century, he's called the father of history. But in the same century, but a little bit later, there's another Greek historian that emerges named Thucydides, and he's labeled the father of scientific history, whatever the hell that means. Neither one of them mentions Rome once. Yet Rome should be in everybody's vernacular, right? Everybody should know what Rome is based on its history, right? Being founded in the 8th century BC or whatever, right? You don't see these accounts, and I'm trying to figure out why. You don't see any, like, nobody from the time that would have mentioned King Solomon's temple or any of that stuff, Israel, they don't mention any of it. And this is the problem. You're going to start seeing that all this biblical narrative is not in the actual historical record. The only thing you're going to find in Jesus in the first century is the Celtic Jesus, God of War, ESUS. You can find his name inscribed on the pillar of the boatmen in France, Roman Gaul. So you see all this, there's serious implications to what we're talking about. But if you look into it, some of this stuff is not as crazy as you'd think it would be when you start figuring out, like, why are we taught one thing and then it's not in the historical record? Why are the Rosetta Stones, which all translations of the hieroglyphics are dependent on, why are they Greek? Why are they not in some Phoenician or Celtic language or Etruscan? There's mummies that they found called the Zagreb mummy, Zagreb, in Luxor, wrapped in Etruscan script. So where's that in the Rosetta Stone? And people are starting to think, the Rosetta Stones are probably forgeries. Or if they're real, they're just young. And so those hieroglyphics are just a version of Greek, just like the Coptic is Greek, Cyrillic. They're all Greek-based, Ethiopic, Hebrew. They all correspond to each other. And going back to the Caledonians, I wouldn't be surprised if Hebrew is a modern invention by Brits using a Chaldean syntax. Because if you look at the Welsh language, there's nothing in any other language that has more affinity to Hebrew than the Welsh language.
Really?
They have something called tea bread. It's called I think it's called Bara Brit. And it means tea bread. But Bara means creation in Hebrew. And then Brit is a covenant. It's the same word. And it looks like when we spell it in English, it looks like Berith, Berith, but they pronounce it Brit. So and people have written, Welsh scholars have written about this. They share like of all the affinity in all these languages with Hebrew, the Welsh has more than any of them, especially with the sounds. And I wouldn't be surprised. Hebrew is the system. So learning how to read Hebrew and transliterate Hebrew will help you learn ancient Italian, and then the Welsh languages and all that stuff, or the British languages. They go in hand. But my contention is that the Latin is not descended from Hebrew or Greek, as pretended. I think Hebrew and Greek are inserted artificially into Latin to cover up European history. And I think this is probably it's definitely a product of the Middle Ages, but it might even be like the late Middle Ages. That's my opinion. I know that's controversial. It's not on Mr. Kindness. Just me.
Yeah,
I'm speaking off the cuff. You're not liable for any of this, so don't start a Reddit troll thread and bash Mr. Kindness. It's all on me.
I wouldn't worry about that. That's fine.
There's something to be said about it, and if you look, it's there. It's there in the language, and I just think what we're looking at is people creating history on behalf or employment from the religious institutions. And in order for that history to make sense, it has to conform to everything coming from the Orient. But when you go back to the Americas, they have someone, if you look this name up, Cox. And that Noah story is theirs too. And instead of a raven, they send out a vulture. And instead of the dove, they send out a hummingbird. It's the same story dressed up differently. And so they knew this in the 1500s, and they were trying to figure out, had Christians and Jews already colonized these people long ago? And the conclusion that they came to is, no, they couldn't have, because they have all these stories in one system. They're not divided like Christianity and Judaism is. So whoever brought this had to have these allegories and these stories prior to the schism. Wow. And they didn't have use of letters in America. They had pictures. They drew paintings. So if they had letters, then it would have made sense that Jews or Christians brought it to them. But they didn't have letters, which means Jews and Christians couldn't have brought it to them. Otherwise, they would have brought the use of letters. They would have brought the skills of smelting iron, all kinds of stuff like that. And they didn't have any of that. And then when you look at what the Queen of Spain, Isabella, did, you couldn't come to the new Spain, the new world. You had to get express permission. You could not be anybody other than a soldier or somebody associated with the Jesuits, Dominicans, Franciscans, someone associated with the Inquisition and the priesthood. You couldn't be a Jew. You couldn't be a Muslim or anything like that, a Moor. You couldn't be a scholar, a clerk, anybody related to the legal industry, a doctor. They didn't want learned people over here because they were burning everything and destroying this cover-up because it exposed the church. And that's there. You can see that in the historical record.
Funnily enough, Dylan, I had that as one of my points we were going to talk about. One thing I'm going to talk about first, which because you mentioned it, and it was to do with, have you ever heard of a book called The Colburn Bible?
Yeah, I just did a show with Crow, and when I looked it up, I can't find any of the earliest manuscripts. All I can find online of it, so maybe you can send, like, I want to actually look at like the archived actual text so I can see it in its authentic capacity. Because right now, all I see is people like modern transcriptions of it using like Microsoft Word. So I want like, like when I show you the Psalter of Colmkill, it's in a library. They've archived it. It's got digital photos. You can go look at it and flip through a page and see it in its original form.
Well, it's got an interesting story, the Colburn Bible.
But I would like to look into it if you can find the original
You can
copies.
buy one. I think there's called the Colburn Society or something like that. But they were basically, again, I'm trying to find one of these people to come
I just want to see, because I'm
I'm
that guy that's going to look at how it's written in real life. Like, I'm going to look at the artifact value. And so if it reeks of bullshit, I'll call it out. But I can't even find that. I can't find that.
You can buy the book. I think it's called the Colburn Society or something along those lines.
No, but you get what I'm saying? I'm not trying to buy
to have an original one.
I want to see the original manuscript. Like, I want to see the fragments. I want to see whatever it's from in the historical record so I can look at it. That's what I'm going from.
Yeah. So and it ties into the point you were making about how the Spanish weren't allowing anyone into South America or Central America, the Americas. And I have my own views on it. We'll get to them and we can discuss them. But one of the interesting historical parts of the British Isles is the story of St. Patrick, because he chased all the snakes out of Ireland. And I know it's an allegory. It's the snakes were the druids, because the ancient symbol of the snake was for knowledge, not a bad person.
The serpent is wisdom.
Serpent is wisdom, exactly. Yep. And the story in the Colburn is, and I just checked this out. I had to double check it because I thought, pretty sure that Jesus, according to this Bible, that Jesus himself came to Britain, and he went to Stonehenge because it's part of the Druid culture, and it was a pure form of what he said was early Christianity. I actually did this on ChatGPT, just a little check, because I said, what did I say? In the Colburn Bible, is it written that Jesus came to Britain? And yes, I'm going to read you verbatim, so it's quite funny. The Colburn Bible does mention that Jesus visited Britain. According to the text, Jesus is said to have traveled to Britain on a Phoenician ship, red alert, with his great uncle Joseph of Arimathea. This journey is claimed to have occurred during Jesus' youth or early adulthood. The Colburn Bible contains accounts from Celtic merchants who reportedly met Jesus during their travels to the Middle East. The idea of Jesus visiting Britain is part of a broader tradition found in other legends and apocryphal stories, but it's worth noting that these accounts are not recognized in mainstream Christian theology or historical scholarship. So, I thought that was fascinating. That
funny enough,
came there with a Phoenician merchant.
Yeah, and they always ignore the Apocrypha, but if you look at like the early Christian fathers, they quote the Apocrypha more than just about anything.
Is that right?
But so back to your Florence trip. I don't remember if we were talking that on the air or off the air, but something I want to show you here. So you'll see in the middle of a sun. So this is the Jesuit IHS, right?
IHS. What does that stand for, the IHS?
Well, they'll tell you it stands for Jesus, the Savior of all men. Like,
okay, because that's all over the place.
Hominum Salvator, right?
Yeah.
But it's not. That's for the rabble, not for what. So people who are initiated can look at this and they'll see that it's actually Latin and Greek letters mixed into one thing. So this upsilon, when you accent it, you can ask anybody who speaks Greek, it becomes the hu. You'll see it like written like in the word. So we pronounce like hydro or hudor. If you look at it in Greek, I'm not going to write it out. I can, but it's for, well, I'll do it. So it would look like U, that weird D, O, R. So that when that is accented, it functions like HU. So that IHS comes from the old monogram of Bacchus, the sun. And you'll see that in Florence, look up YHS. And what it really signifies is Hu Esh. And if you look at the Hebrew, ES, that's the fire. God, Hu, you, how we talked about that with Jupiter, Hu Esh, God the fire, the sun, and that's why you see it. Jesus is the sun. So if I were to literally transliterate that, it would look like IES. And you'll see it in the Greek world, it looks like this. That's kind of looks like R. Yeah, it looks like an S. So Jesus is the sun, and what day is St. Patrick's Day? Remember? It's March 17th.
March 17th.
So I don't know about you guys, but that, when you look at the name, the word equinox, it means equal night. And those are the days of judgment, Judgment Day, because the sun judges the world equally in day and night. The 17th is when the actual equinox is for a lot of parts, especially in New England, definitely. It might be in your part. That's why that holiday is really there. It's the sun crossing over, and that's where it begets all that other stuff. Passover.
So that's not 21st of March, because that's when I...
No, they call it the 21st. That's what it is like to the lay people. But if you actually go on like time and date and look at the exact astronomical precision of when, you're never going to get a day where the night and day are exactly equal. But on the 17th, for where I am, it's the 18th. But on the 17th, on the east coast of America, and I think it changes based on geographical regions. And this is part of the caveat to why calendars are so difficult to pin down, because it's subjective based on your location. But with empire and business, you have to establish something consistent for everybody. So that's where all this religious festivals and holidays come from, to try to just give the lay people the generalized idea of what is occurring when, so you know when to plant, you know when to harvest, you know, all that stuff. And, you know, depending on whether you live near somewhere like the Nile River, well, your winter is essentially going to be, if you just think about winter as a concept of death, like where you can't grow things, it's going to be closer to the Nile flooding, the height of summer, because you can't plant. And then you got to wait for that to subside. That's when where it's most fertile. That's when you sow, and then you harvest, you know. So it just depends. But going back to that, you look it up, the 17th is exactly St. Patrick's Day. And St. Patrick has all the solar symbolism. It's the sun at the equinox, vernal equinox.
Yeah. So it comes...
That's how I would look at it. I'm not saying you have to accept that. I'm just telling you from the priesthood's perspective, that's how I would look at it from a Druidical perspective.
And why did they pick that day in particular? You know, why is it? Anyway.
Well, because the day is night. That's how you let them know the day is equal. The day and night are equal. So you know from that moment, especially if you're measuring it with all these like astronomical temples, whether it's Stonehenge, Avebury, all that stuff, you're keeping, that's the function of the priest, is to reckon time. And when you know the sun is crossing that moment, you know soon you can start sowing, planting. Because if your people are dependent on, if you have to feed all these people, you need to be precise on when you harvest. When you need to get the most out of your growing seasons. You need to know what grows at what time and what grows a little bit later in the season, the first fruits, all of that stuff. That's why they do it.
Yeah, geez. So if Jesus did come to Britain, Dylan, that would change everything, right? And the
some people even say is from France, you know, like
I've heard that
even
one
like
well.
Je suis. I am. I'm the great I am.
Je
But
suis
again, that's
Jésus.
Jesus, Je suis, whatever.
Yeah.
But Jesus tells you, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. So if you look at that, those are Greek letters. That's an acrostic. So it would look like I am the Alpha and Omega. But Omega in Greek looks like that. Or if it's lowercase, it kind of looks like a W. So who he really is Yao. You'll see that all the way to China, Emperor Yao. You'll see that in the Gnostic, Yao, Abraxas. You'll see Abraxas, he's got like the rooster head. Fish. Yeah, he's got like the serpent. I'm sorry, I'm just showing. Maybe that's where some of these Indian symbols come from. Just trying to draw a simple thing, and you're like me, and you can't draw. But yeah. So if you look at some of this stuff, you see it. Yeah, you'll see that he's confessing, or whoever wrote that story is confessing that he's Yao, and Yao is an old heathen or heathen name for the sun.
And that's where it starts to get interesting as well. When the Son of God, he's always got this golden halo, which looks like the sun.
It's like so obvious, and it's not a bad thing. I honestly, and a lot of people will have problems with this, but I'm like, no, that's where the value of your religion is knowing what it represents. That's where you get the value of it, knowing what it means, knowing what it signifies astronomically. It's an awesome system. The problem is there are people who have used it, specifically, the British kings. They all pretend they're descended from Japheth, and this line of like Sylvanus, what is it, Silvus? I always confuse Silvus with Sylvanus because it's the same word. When you get rid of the termination, these words are all the same. It goes back to Sylvans, savior, or Selvans. But these people all pretended they're descended from these Abrahamic religious figures, and that's why they have a right to govern you. And I think the Irish, maybe one of the reasons they did preserve themselves for so long, because they weren't having it.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. The fact that the Druids they still are Druids in the UK, sun worshippers.
And I think they've been demonized, by the way. I don't necessarily believe they were as vicious as people claim they were.
Well, it is, isn't it? The eating babies, child sacrifice, and all that. It's the same when you want to demonize. When you want to demonize a different culture, you say how bloody horrible they are. Now, I don't know. Like you, I try to keep an open mind with things, but when you see certain or hear certain things that St. Patrick was sent to Ireland to clear out all the Druids. What do you reckon they used? Was it a kind word and here's a boat? Or do you think it went through there with it was probably a bloody affair. And which brings me back to the Central America thing. What you do, the last thing the Spanish would want would be, let's say, a British ship turning up and going, what the hell's going on here? Where's all this gold coming from? What are all these books? And for a fact, I would bet a considerable amount of money that the texts that they discovered or were handed over to them by the priests in Mexico, Central America, South America, all over the place, and what they're doing, we're taking them, we're saying they were burning them. I doubt very much they were burning them. I think it's been a campaign, and I'm not anti-church. I'm not anti anyone. I'm just saying.
Yeah, me either. I mean, it's not like everybody associated with them knows what's going on. It's just a very small. When you look at these. It's just bad people. Structure. It's a very small position of people that know what's going on, and everyone else is kind of just compartmentalized and going with the flow and following orders or whatever.
Yeah, and exactly, and it's a power play, and there's that much gold. And hang on, our power structure is based on this story. Over here in South America, they've got a story which goes way further back that we actually know from the rest of our library. So we can't have them confirming that, no, you guys are talking nonsense. The actual thing is happening.
100%. That's the exact conclusion that I came to.
Yeah, and I'm not, again, who am I? It's just
and I could be wrong, and you might disagree with me. I could be wrong. I'm just letting you know that's the conclusion I came to, is just we have to destroy that to preserve ourselves. It wasn't like they wanted to destroy it because they hated them or whatever.
Because your story is based on a set of truths agreed upon. A set of lies agreed upon. However you want to say it, and that's a major. I mean, it's it would bring the whole facade down. But it seems to be happening, bit by bit. I think that there've been the people who are studying these things, the archaeologists and historians who are going a little bit out of the box, are bit by bit finding stuff that shows that, yeah, actually the culture, well, I mean, it's very clear that the culture up until the advent of the modern church was sun worship. There's absolutely no question about that.
But it's
There's
not
no,
even
why
like
would you
sun.
spend
I
so
don't
much
even
time?
think sun worship is the right word. It's the fact that the sun is the only thing that's eternally consistent, because if you were to build a temple that's associated with the stars and aligned with the stars, at first it works out, but over enough time, because of precession, they become misaligned. Whereas the sun, if you just focus on the equinoxes and the solstice, that is eternal. And that's why it represents gold, because gold is we don't even really know the full extent of what gold is, because it doesn't tarnish. You can dig up artifacts, right? You look at like that symbol that people call the swastika or svastika. Well, in our cultures, it's called the Gamadion, and that's like the Triskelion or Treskele. It's like a form of that, and you can find that inscribed in gold in Etruria from the 9th century BC. And so all these people who are like Odinists and like Scandinavians, it's like, well, that's fine. Use all that stuff. There's nothing wrong with it. But don't pretend like you invented it. Or if you're going to, you need to acknowledge your ancestry, where it came from in Italy. Know that your people actually came from down there. You are a diaspora. And that's what I'm saying is like that Celtic phenotype is more likely from Italy, that Central European phenotype, because when you look at the accounts of the historians back then, you can see in the 2nd century, and I don't see why you would lie about this unless the whole document is a forgery, because only the initiated could read at that time. And you'll see that all of the known world that they knew was from Narbo, which was Narbonne, France, to Tanais, which is like north of just like the Black Sea area. And they said anything north of that right now is unknown. And those who claim to know anything are thought to be liars or whatever, or laying down fables. However, this hasn't, the Etruscologists that I learned this detail I'm about to share with you, the archaeologists in Italy, they haven't had, I hate using the word scientifically because it's not employing the scientific method, but they say, for lack of a better word, they say scientifically analyzed, but I'm just going to say the amber pendants. If you look up Etruscan amber pendants, you'll see all kinds of stuff online in Google. Amber was really expensive. A pendant, an amber figurine, fetched more of a price than a healthy slave. So some of this amber, the content that comes from the amber that comes from the Baltic region has something in it that I forget the name of, that the Sicilian amber doesn't have. So because the amber hasn't been technically analyzed yet, we don't know necessarily where the Etruscan amber is coming from. If it happens to be coming from the Baltic region, then it means they were up there centuries before that quote I was telling you, when they're saying, oh, we don't know what's north of the Black Sea. That means they were at least doing what they were doing in Britain, and they were finding the amber and coming back. And obviously, you're probably making settlements, but they're not civilized. There's no like complex concentration of human civilization there. But who knows? That might have been how the Nordic peoples colonized there. Or if you want to say this is all coming from the north, we now have to look at, well, how are people surviving in those environments without the right clothing and technology, women, children, all that stuff. So we're looking at a totally different change in the landscape, in my opinion, because I'm like 10 degrees south of where like Norway is, right? And if I'm outside during winter for like more than an hour, even with like highly competent, like windproof, weatherproof gear, I'm starting to get really cold. So it's like the idea of somebody surviving that with like, you look at like,
well, we did.
People are going to war with like no clothing on and
Kilts.
stuff,
Yeah,
but the kilts have a function though. The kilts are cloaks. They're bed. Like the kilts have a really good function, And that's one of the things, going back to the Caledonians, that's one of the things they found in America is some of them also had those
Mm.
cloaks that they would sleep in and stuff.
Yeah, for some reason, I haven't been to that part of North America, but I know people who live there and say how cold it is, Vermont, New Hampshire, that kind of area. And where we are, if you look on the map, on the globe, it's pretty much the same latitude, not far off, maybe even a little bit south. But we've got the Gulf Stream, you see, so it doesn't get. I mean, yes, it
and
does.
we also have the elevation. That's the problem. Like the Rocky Mountains, like the elevation is what, once you're like 2,000 feet above sea level, it gets cold faster.
It gets a lot colder. Yeah. Well, I'm about, I don't know, 1,500 meters right now. So whatever that is, about 3,500 foot or something.
So you're up there. That's a lot.
Yeah. I'm looking across the Alps as we speak. I've got
Albion. I think it's all the same word. Yeah. Alpin and Albin. High rocks.
That's
white. Phoenician.
I'll make this the last point because I'm already late for dinner. But this is much more interesting, and it involves the what do you call it? Oh yeah, so your namesake, De Cesare, that from the Julius Caesar. Did you know that have you ever heard of a podcast? Well, it's a podcast, but it's called Hardcore Histories by Dan Carlin. You ever this guy? It's fantastic.
I don't think so. He's amazing. Maybe I have.
Yeah, if you want to learn a lot about a culture in 6 hours of podcast, then he's your man because he's very thorough and he's really good and he looks at it from different things. But so you got the Gauls of the French, they're the Gaels, as a Gallic tribe, as were the Iberians and the rest of us.
And even that term is problematic because you're predicated on being descended from Gomer, which is like one of Noah's grandsons, right?
Yeah.
I like the word Gallic. Yeah, so I like the word Celtic. I think it's Gomer, something like that. I like the word Celtic because it comes from Phoenicia and it means Celta. It means blonde, or it means yellow or saffron colored. Right. Excuse me. So it's not it's not like a race. It's just saying you have like yellow, hair. Reddish hair. Yeah. And I just want to also make something, just because I'm from the Caesar family, it doesn't mean I'm descended from Julius, but I'm just showing that because my grandfather has that same phenotype. For those, for people who hear this, they can see it for themselves. You can look at that
look at the statue,
superimpose it, use Canva or something just to make the photos transparent, same size, and you'll see the face structure, everything. It's all the same phenotype.
Yeah, so because he led, remember the cartoon Asterix and Obelix? It's much more popular in Europe, but it was a cartoon.
I don't watch TV. Sorry.
And they do, and movies and stuff. And, it's all joking about the Gauls. Asterix the Gaul was his name. They're all fighting the Romans. But it was a genocide that the Romans killed. Well, according to this guy, Dan Carlin, it was 3 million of the Gaels. And then the old name for Switzerland is Helvetia.
The Helvetii, actually, there's an account that Julius, they had their laws and stuff were written in Greek letters, and they were trying to figure out how the hell did Greeks get to the Helvetii? How did the Helvetii have use of Greek letters? That's in the historical record that people are curious about.
Yeah, and his campaign was to wipe out the Gaelic. It
must have come from Britain, right? Do you think the Helvetii, if they had, because the Alps are really not it's really difficult to cross through parts of those Alps, right?
Yeah, so for sure.
It implies the fact that they had the Greek letters, they must have come from Britain, right?
From the other side.
Because the Greeks eventually started taking over the Phoenician trade routes until there was a battle, I think it's called the Battle of Alalia. It's right like near Corsica, where the Carthaginians and the Etruscans got together and they just took on the Greek the navy, and they lost it, but they beat the Greeks so bad, the Greek, like they had nothing left. So that's what stopped Greek expansion. But I wanted to bring that to you about the Helvetii. The fact that they had the Greek letters is a big, if it's true, it's a big deal.
Well,
and real quick, another thing that's controversial, because people are talking about how the Romans like massacred Germans and massacred Britons, but the reality is one of Julius Caesar's best friends was Divitiacus, who was an archdruid, and Britain was the seat of learning. That's where you had to go to become a druid to begin with. And
That's what
so,
Jesus was there for.
yeah. So, and
according to the
if that's
Bible.
true, that's exactly why he would have been brought there to be initiated. It was known as a seat of learning. That's where everybody in Gaul sent their, basically you send your kids there to become made men. So
yeah, initiated.
I think the whole reason they were over there is because as this situation was crumbling, the British kings were trying to get out of paying tribute, and they had to go there and make sure that all that stayed, and they continued to pay. So once they got that, they left. So it wasn't about trying to conquer them. You know what I mean? And who's conquering and building Hadrian's Wall across the whole friggin' country? That's crazy. Nobody does that when they conquer, or like when they're like, that's like you're setting up shop there at that point. It's like your country now.
Hey, listen, Dylan, I'm gonna get shot if I don't go.
Yeah, no, let's wrap it up. It was a pleasure, man, and I look forward to getting a copy. I'll share it with my Substack people. It goes directly to their email, and I'll send the links to your site. Anything you want me to share where they can support you, let me know. All
right. So what's just give us the Holy Sailors on Instagram.
So the two books related to this are the Holy Sailors, Spirit World, the Holy Sailors, Spirit World Terminalia, and then the Real Universal Empire. Now, this is the one you can give to little kids. It's not. We're not going to be talking about religion. We're not going to be talking about conquering, like nothing violent, none of that. But Spirit World is controversial. It's more the adult version. But if you want to see the artifacts, you want to see where I do this with the language, with the locations. I've got this location on my Substack where I have all these places that'll be of interest to you in Britain, the Balearic Islands, Mediterranean, you name it. That where you're going to find my work and all of my podcasts and stuff from now on. And this is being published in audio and visual form. You can just go and onto the Substack. It's Great Tide, GreatTide.substack.com. And you can just watch the preview for yourself and see if it's something you want to take advantage of. But yeah, it's a monthly fee, but you get access to everything. And then if not, some people just stay subscribed so they can get updates when I'm on a podcast like this one. So that's where you can find me. And appreciate you reaching out to me. I'm glad we got together. I was kind of hesitant because I don't really want to be a public figure, but because of your relationship with Darius, I knew you had credibility. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go on and see what we do. Yeah, so thank him.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he seems like a great guy. So
yeah, he's a cool guy. And
if I had a great time talking to you, so if you want to have Crow on as a guest, you let me know, and I'll try to set that up. I'll send this to him, and then maybe if you want to have him on,
see what he says.
Yeah, no, he'll love to talk about this stuff.
Crow777.com.
Yeah.
I really like.
Well, no, not crow777.com because someone hijacked that. He's crow777radio.com. CRROW777 radio.com.
Radio.com. Yeah. All right, Dylan, thank you so much. Man. I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for listening. What a wonderful chat, man. That was great fun. I loved it.
Yeah, I had a great time too. I think it would be fun to get a beer in person. So hopefully someday we'll make that happen.
When you come to Italy.
Yeah, I want to learn how to speak your languages. All right, man.
All right.
Good night.
Take care. Bye.